We want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to work with the children of our community and to serve the community through our vocation to education. We at RCPS take that very seriously, and we want to make sure that we're presenting the best educational opportunities to our students while remaining fiscally responsible. So this year was obviously a very challenging year. We had to deal with the pandemic. Our staff had to reinvent the education process in a matter really of a couple of days when we went to remote learning in the springtime, just about 1 year ago. Our students and staff made it through that successfully in the spring, but then during the summer, we had to plan on how to bring students back to in-person learning in the fall while maintaining the health and safety of the community. And we also had to respect the interests of parents who were interested in making sure that their students had the opportunities to learn remotely. So we were teaching in two settings at the same time in many cases. And that was a challenge. You can imagine how challenging that would have been. But we have been successful this year in dealing with COVID issues all through the year. Our kids have been in school. And I dare say that we've been able to maintain in-person learning as much as any other school district in the state. In the midst of all of this, we were able to map out a responsible budget, which Ted Plemenis, our Director of Finance, is going to explain in a few minutes. But I just wanted to finish by saying it's our sincere commitment to making sure that we keep our students in school this year, and that takes a lot of work. We had to focus on maintaining students in school for two purposes: one, for the health of the community, and really for the health of the local economy, and also for the better learning that the students would achieve in an in-school setting. So we appreciate your support all through the year. We always appreciate the support you give us for our students in our schools. We know that a strong school system is critical for a community to thrive. And we are really hoping to count on your support as we go forward to next year, where we think we probably will still be dealing with some elements of the pandemic. That'll be a challenge that we'll have to face determining how that's going to work in the fall. We also are considering how we're going to deal with students who had some learning loss this year and how we catch those students up. So those are two big challenges to look forward to, and we need your support to do that. Really, next year is just going to be as critical as this year was. Finally, I'd like to thank our board members who have supported us all along, especially through the budget process. Some of our board members also have been interested and involved in researching the research of the UVM weighting study. And hopefully we're hoping that we can maybe pursue that a little bit further with the legislature and see that it gets implemented in our schools. That would be a great benefit for our school community. We know that over the course of the last several years, our school system has been underfunded by the funding formula for students and how students are weighted. So we hope to see some change there. That might not come immediately, but we expect that maybe over the course of the next year or two, we could see some change. So we hope if you have questions about that, we can answer that as well. That would bring a benefit to the Rutland community as well. So I'll thank you again. I'm going to pass the mic over to Ted Plemenis, our Director of Finance.
Bill, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this presentation of information regarding our upcoming budget. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can. Let's see if that'll work. Can everybody see my screen okay? Great. Okay. Well, let me just need to go ahead and move that. Here we go. So I just want to show you briefly the agenda for this evening. Bill has provided the introduction for our session tonight. I'm going to spend about 15 or 20 minutes giving a budget overview, some of the key elements of what we anticipate and propose for the fiscal year 2022 budget. We're also very fortunate to have with us tonight Pam Reed, the district's Director of Equity and Inclusion, who's going to give us an update on support services program, and also Melissa Connor, director of the Stafford Technical Center, who's going to provide us with an update on many of the encouraging developments and successes at STC. Then we'll provide a few brief wrap-up comments and leave plenty of time for questions and answers to follow. So with that, let me give you a couple of the key messages that are part of our budget proposal this year. This budget having been approved by the school board back on January 12th, we're proposing expenses for the district of $58 million in the coming year, which would be a decrease of $800,000 for this year. We began back in August and early September working with school principals, program directors, various administrators, asking everybody to identify any efficiencies that they could, identify opportunities for lowering costs, deferring some costs if that made sense, and thereby potentially to offset, in this case, to more than offset the higher costs that we would anticipate normally for salary and benefit increases, and of course, some increased costs that we've been experiencing associated with COVID-19 protocols. So we have a good news story on that to report to you this evening. Unfortunately, the district's revenues are declining from this year to next, and they're declining by more than the expense reduction. I'll show you what's going on there. That basically is a change in local revenues because we had, in this current year, planned to draw down a working capital surplus, basically returning money to the taxpayers. We won't be doing that to the same extent in 22. So that on the financial statements essentially looks like a decline in revenues. And again, I'll show you a couple of charts on that briefly. Fortunately, as many know, the state and federal governments have been making a variety of grants available to assist with COVID challenges and protocols. And we have been taking great advantage of that. There's one series of grants that is supportive of elementary and secondary school. The district has been approved to receive about $1 million in that support. There is a coronavirus relief fund. We applied for about $600,000 of benefits there to offset incremental costs that we began experiencing in the spring of 2020 and have experienced this year. We've been approved for those. The Stafford Technical Center applied for some COVID-related grants coming out. I believe they were COVID-related, $374,000. So that's helping with the center's activities there. And we are anticipating additional grants will be announced for fiscal 2022 and 23. We're going to be monitoring that very carefully to take advantage wherever we can of those opportunities where the district is eligible. In short, and I'll show you how this works out as we get into some other charts, the average cost per pupil in the district is actually going to increase from 21 to 22. Now, you may be wondering, well, wait a minute, Ted just told me that my expenses of $58 million are going down. How can the cost per pupil be going up? And the reason is because that cost is a net. You start with your total expenses, you subtract out local and federal revenues. What's left is the net cost to the state of Vermont. And that net cost to the state of Vermont is used to calculate the cost per pupil. Because those revenues are declining, the average cost actually is going up a bit by 6% year to year. Again, it's not a total cost increase. It's a function of our revenues. The good news is even with that impact, as you can see, the district, which has traditionally had average cost per pupil below the state of Vermont, is going to remain 4 to 5% below in the coming year. And another piece of encouraging news, as you may have read, is the state is continuing to explore many possible steps to offset local impacts of anticipated education expenses in the coming year. So with that, let me move forward and just show you something that I think is very compelling. As some of you may know, 80% of the district's total costs consist of salaries and benefits for teachers, other staff, and such. This chart shows you what the total compensation costs are for this current year's budget, fiscal 21, in the first bar, and then moving to the right for the proposed budget next year. I will note for you that I have a non-zero scale here. It doesn't start at zero, just so you can see the movements, but everything else is proportional. And you can see that the blue portion of each bar represents salaries. The orange portion of each bar represents benefits. You might be able to notice that next year in 22, the dollars involved in the benefits section actually increases because of medical premiums increasing and other related costs. But the total salaries component is declining, which helps the total compensation costs remain flat at 46.4 million. What the administration recognized earlier in this school year was that we probably would need to take a close look at where we could realize some efficiencies in staffing, as well as some other areas. And you can see at the very bottom of the chart that the current year has a budget that includes 518 full-time employees. We're proposing a budget for next year that would have a reduction of about 17 full-time equivalents to 501. Those reductions obviously are very difficult to make because they involve people who have supported the district, made great contributions, and basically are part of the family. But at the same time, with enrollment declines in recent years, it's always important to keep abreast of, where we need to keep alignment between staffing and enrollment. So 80% of the budget is remaining flat in that regard year to year based upon our proposal. So the $800,000 reduction I was telling you about comes from all the other expenses in the budget. So 20% of each dollar that we spend is in a variety of categories, which are shown at the very bottom under the blue bars. So for example, the first bar, which is about $3.3 million for next year as proposed, are our program instructional direct expenses, excluding salaries and benefits, which we've already reviewed. The next bar over, the next largest one at about $1.7 million proposed for next year, is for facilities, grounds, and transportation. There's an other category that includes a number of various expenses, including grant-related expenses. I won't go into the details of that, but that's remaining flat. Our food costs of $1.3 million, a very substantial part of the budget. This is the only area or category of expense in the other category that we're allowing to increase next year. And we're anticipating a very slight 1% increase in cost. The concept here is because of the importance of good nutrition to students and learning, and because we recognize that there's some inflation in food costs to be offset potentially by declining enrollment, we don't want to shortchange our students in that area. However, all these other costs that you've seen across the board are being held flat to down in the coming year. In the finance area, we're looking for some savings next year, trying to refinance some debt and take advantage of the lower interest rate environment. Our special education program expenses are anticipated to decline next year. Pam Reed's going to talk a little bit more about that perhaps. The concept there is we always provide the services that our students need and which are mandated by the state. But our costs from year to year in this area can vary depending upon the particular students that we have, depending upon the nature of services that they require. An interesting thing here is the number of individual educational programs is expected to go up from about 400 this year to 425 students next year. But because of economies of scale and efficiencies, the net cost is actually expected to go down. We're holding IT costs flat at about $700,000. Thank goodness for the judicious and selective investments that have been made by this district in recent years, which enabled the kind of switch to remote learning within 48 to 72 hours last spring. It's critically important as more and more activities revolve around IT to keep this area robust and well maintained. We are anticipating a drop in utility costs. They're forecasted about $650,000 next year, in part, hopefully, benefiting from some of the savings that we're supposed to realize with the completion of the recent Johnson control projects, such as the solar panels at the high school and Stafford. So there you can see it's this other category of expenses that we're expecting to drop. That orange line, by the way, that's just there to show what the percentage of costs are in the various categories, so that you can see the program costs of 3.3. They're about a third of this area. By the time you add in facilities and transportation costs, the second biggest category, you're at about 40% of the area, all the way over to 100%. So it's just a way of looking at the relative size of some of these expenses. But we have been looking at them all very carefully for the reasons that Bill described. I wanted to address briefly the concept of 25 cents on the dollar. We've talked about this as a district in the past, and the concept is that about 25% of every dollar of educational expense is funded by local taxpayers, which means that the other 75% is funded by outside state and federal resources. This makes the district a net receiver of funds, which is fairly important. How do we get to this kind of ratio? Well, $14 million of taxes were paid by Rutland City taxpayers in fiscal year 21, the current year. That includes homestead, commercial, and non-homestead taxes. I've detailed them in two categories right there, so you can see the $5 million of homestead taxes, $9 million of commercial, and other. If you like, you can learn a little bit more about those details by going onto the website of the city treasurer. But when you look at the $14 million of taxes that were paid by local taxpayers for this year, relative to last year's budget of $58.8 million, you get a ratio of about 25%. So that, I think, is very important to consider, because while we obviously want to be as careful and judicious as we can with all expenses, the district is in a very fortunate position to be a net receiver of significant funds coming in from the state and from federal sources. Another way to think about that is that the incoming funds into our city definitely contribute to the local economy and generate what economists call a multiplier effect. For every dollar that comes into economies, they tend to get respent locally, and that can generate $2 or $2.50 worth of economic activity. So I'm going to pass on the point at the bottom there, just because it's related, and I want to keep the thing moving. So we have time for Pam and Melissa. This is just a graphic view of what I talked about a moment ago in terms of the 25 cents on the dollar. On the left-hand pie chart, you can see that the state provided for fiscal 21 about 55% of the district's total revenues, federal and local, 45%. That local includes, for example, a few $1 million of tuition income that the district receives when surrounding towns send some of their students to our school. That category also included the working capital surplus that I alluded to a little bit earlier. So then again, you can see that, if you take that big orange 55% slice and you start to divide it up a little further, you can see that the homestead taxes or $5 million were about 9 cents of every dollar of educational funds. And the non-homestead and commercial taxes of $9 million were about 15% of each dollar. So, by far, we're a net beneficiary from incoming funds. Okay, let's see. I mentioned revenues declining, and the main driver here is working capital. You will notice that I've shown several categories of revenues here, and on the top line, you can see federal grants and reimbursements are expected to go up next year from the budget this year at $12.1 million to increase by almost $1 million to over $13 million, as we take advantage of Title I, Title II, Title IV funds, as well as COVID relief opportunities that we're anticipating and that have been announced. I mentioned tuition a moment ago. You can see that we're anticipating that going up a bit with students, and we are allowed to raise tuition each year, which we're doing to reflect our cost. The working capital was a decision to return in this current year about $4.5 million of surplus that had accumulated over the years. The decision was made that, those are obviously taxpayer funds. We had an adequate capital cushion. It was time to return those monies. That was included in revenue for this year and contributed significantly to the $26.5 million of federal and local. We're going to use a little bit of that in the current fiscal year, proposed at $1 million, but obviously a big part of the drop, as you can see, is working capital related. The special ed and local revenues are anticipated to decline a little bit. That kind of goes in tandem with the fact that our costs for special ed are going down. 56% of those costs are typically reimbursable up to a certain threshold. So when you take a look at the total federal and local revenues dropping from 26.5 million to 23.6 or 7 next year, that leaves more of our expenses that need to be funded out of the Vermont Education Fund, which is going to be rising from 32.2 million this year to almost $34.5 million next year. That's the increase of 6%. And that's what we're talking about as driving the average cost per pupil, because it is this bottom line of cost that's used in those per pupil calculations. The next chart just summarizes that, basically some of the data we've looked at before, and shows you the concept that I've described to say start with your expenses, subtract your federal and local, what's left over the state has to pay for. That's what they care about when it comes to calculating average cost per student. Equalized pupils is a particular metric that's provided by the Agency of Education. It's used based on what the state tells us that metric needs to be to calculate the average cost per pupil. And you can see there the 6% increase. It's a slightly higher percentage increase than Vermont overall, but the district still remains below the Vermont average cost due to its size and scale and efficiencies. So tomorrow, for those of you who are going to be voting, or for those of you who perhaps have voted already, you'll see budget article number 1, and the ballot language will be, as I've shown here on this final slide. It shows the total amount of top line expenses. Then it shows the amount of spending per equalized pupil based upon that net amount that the state of Vermont has to pay for, and the percentage increase. And then obviously you'll be asked either to indicate, yes, I approve of this budget, or no, I do not. So with that, let me stop and ask if there are any questions or comments, and just a request to please vote tomorrow. On second thought, maybe what we ought to do is just to proceed, if that's okay with everyone, to Ms. Pam Reed, because I want to make sure that Pam and Melissa have time to present their messages in terms of what the district is doing with the money. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Pam, can you take over?
I sure can. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. As Ted said, my name is Pam Reed, and I serve as the Director of Equity and Inclusion for the district. One of my responsibilities is to ensure that our students have access to programs and supports to address their learning profile. So to share with you some of the highlights of our programs, I thought it would be best if you could see our students in action. So you're going to see pictures of our hardworking staff and students learning in a variety of different settings and through various avenues. Now, the trickiest part is going to be for me to make sure that I can share my screen okay. It's likely that you've heard us say, every student, every day. Sure, it's a catchy phrase, but it's also at the heart of our mission. We strive to develop educational programs for children that meet their unique needs. Whether a student is in need of classroom support, small group instruction to address specific gaps in their learning, access to specialists such as counselors and special educators, or an individualized program, Rutland City Public Schools has developed our continuum of services so that students can reach their goals. This year, we expanded our continuum of services to be able to better personalize learning with the expansion of our Allen Street campus and the addition of our PeerPoint Personalized Learning Center. Having these programs within Rutland City Public Schools has allowed us to meet the needs of our students with fiduciary responsibility. A portion of this year's special education budget reduction is attributed to the development of these programs. Within each of our buildings and in every classroom, we have implemented trauma-informed strategies to better meet the needs of children who have had adverse childhood experiences. With compassion, we have worked diligently to understand the physiological effects of childhood trauma, and design our instruction accordingly. This year, more than ever, we have needed to think creatively about education and student learning. We are proud to have been able to offer a remote learning academy and developed partnerships with families to enable students to learn from home when needed. As we plan our instruction, we will continue to assess student growth and develop intervention systems to address the needs that have surfaced due to the pandemic. The pictures that have been scrolling represent our children across all grade levels and in all of our buildings and programs. They capture different styles of learning and modalities. They show students working together, in person and remote. Most of all, they demonstrate how our children have opportunities through Rutland City Public Schools. They have opportunities to learn from thoughtful, dedicated faculty and staff and our community partners. Their curriculum and programs include experiential, project-based learning opportunities, as well as more traditional instruction. These pictures highlight just a small percentage of our amazing children. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to showcase their learning experiences.
I love to see all the students. I don't know if you could read the Valentine at the end. Some of our primary buildings created and then delivered Valentines to spread joy and love throughout the city. And the last one says that the student wrote that she loves her city. Thought it was really poignant for this presentation. So that's the end of my presentation, highlighting some student growth and opportunity. And I'll be sticking around for any comments or questions at that point.
Thank you so much, Pam. Okay, next up, we're going to ask Melissa Connor to talk a little bit about what's going on at Stafford. And if I can share my screen, we will be able to follow Melissa with your charts. Okay, Melissa?
Thank you, Ted. As Ted said, my name is Melissa Connor, and I'm the very proud director of Stafford Technical Center. And I always find it amazing that a lot of people really don't know what we do here at Stafford. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time tonight just telling you about some of the programs that we offer and some of the opportunities we have for students and how our budget comes in line this year. So at Stafford Technical Center, we have several different career areas. There's actually 14 career areas, as you can see here on the screen. A side note, the pictures that you see for each of the programs were actually taken by our digital arts students who also design our website and maintain our website. So it's something we're very proud of. So we have a wide range of programs, everything from auto body to cosmetology, digital arts, electrical and plumbing, video communications, welding. And our plan for the next couple of years is next school year, we will be expanding our electrical and plumbing program with the hopes of having a master electrician and a master plumber, which will allow our students to earn their apprentice hours for the Department of Labor. So they get kind of a year ahead of themselves than their peers. And then the following school year, we are hoping to expand our health careers program to connect it to the VTC RN program in connection with Rutland Regional Medical Center. So students in their first year in the program will earn their LNA, and in the second year, they will do coursework leading towards the RN program at VTC, and then hopefully employment right at Rutland Regional or another healthcare facility. So some very exciting things happening. Our programs are open to grades 11 and 12, and we do have students from 11 different high schools. And this map just kind of highlights the region that we serve. This year we have 11 schools, including homeschool students that are coming to us. You'll see Middlebury Union High School is with us. They've been with us for the last couple of years. And we can offer programming to students if their local career technical center does not have a program that they're interested in that we do. So we have quite a wide range, and our homeschool population has been growing as well. The next slide shows some of the opportunities that our students have. And like with any educational program, we're always looking for benchmarks of success and making sure that our students are going to be ready for college and or career. And so some of the areas that we really focus on are something called industry recognized credentials. And this is something where a third party partner will come in and assess our students on their technical skills to make sure that they are at the industry level when they are leaving our center. And so what I put together here is a chart, and it shows for the last 3 years the percentage of our students who are enrolled that are earning those industry recognized credentials. So you'll see last year, despite being remote for the entire spring semester, still 65% of our students were able to earn those industry recognized credentials, whereas the year before it was 78.6. Many of our programs also offer college credits to students while they're enrolled here at Stafford. Some of our students leave with up to 18 college credits, and these are all free of charge through the dual enrollment vouchers and the fast forward vouchers that are available to technical center students. And so last year, again, even with the pandemic, a quarter of our students were able to walk away with at least 3 college credits. And then 18.6% of our students last year were able to leave with both an industry recognized credential and college credits, which we think is a huge accomplishment for our students and something that we strive for each year. The other area that we're really proud of that really gives students a chance to really learn about what they want to do with their careers or college is our work-based learning opportunities. As you can see on the chart, last year, again, even with the pandemic, 67.5% of our students were able to participate in a work-based learning opportunity. Some of them looked a little bit different in the spring. Some of them were held virtually so that they were actually able to connect with employers in the field. And it's something that our work-based learning coordinator, Darlene McGlory, does a phenomenal job with, and it grows each and every year. We have more than 50 businesses that host our students. Some of these opportunities are paid while others are unpaid. We always tell the students this is the best chance of a long-term job interview you will ever have. And we're very proud that many of our students do end up with full-time employment upon graduation or the opportunity to have an internship site set up for their college experience. Just this year, we've had several students working at Rutland Regional Medical Center, and one of the education partners that we have there that works with our students said that our students are better prepared than some of the students that come in from a master's program with their interviewing skills and their commitment and work with patients. We've also had a young man who is working at a local automobile dealership, and he has already been offered a full-time job upon graduation. So these are some of the many successes that we have, and we have them each and every year. And you'll see in the photo here, these were some of our LNA students last year as they were preparing to do their clinical rotations at a local nursing home. And they are actually getting ready to head out again next week for this year. Obviously, it looks a little bit different this year with COVID, but they are all prepared and they were offered the opportunity as healthcare workers to be vaccinated before they go out. So that's exciting news for our students. And as I mentioned, community partnerships are huge here at Stafford. We would not be able to do what we do without the community partnerships that we have. Each of our programs has a series of business people who serve on program advisory committees. And between our 14 programs, we have 95 different businesses that are represented. Our regional advisory board is our school board that oversees the daily functioning of here at Stafford. And we have 32 members that are made up of superintendents, school board members, and again, local business partners and post-secondary members. As I mentioned earlier, we have more than 50 locations for work-based learning sites. We also really pride ourselves on the amount of community service that our programs do, whether it's gleaning vegetables for local food shelves, working with the food bank, going in and helping install refrigeration units for the food bank and areas like that, volunteering to help with the solar panels. Those are all things that our students have the opportunity to partner with. And then finally, we have many people that will actually contract with our students to provide services. General Electric partnered with our video program to create training videos. The state police here in Vermont did the same thing. And we're always looking for opportunities for our students to connect with clients who are in our community so that they can better serve our community and make connections with the community. The next slide. How do we know we're doing well? Well, we follow up with our alumni on a regular basis. And you can see at the very bottom the percent of students that we are reaching. This shows that we have a strong connection with our students, not only when we're here, but when they leave. On average, we are being able to follow up with 84% of our students in FY15. And we do this 3 years after. We do a 6-month follow-up and a 3-year follow-up. And what it tells you is these are questions that we are asked by the state to collect the information on. And if you look in the final column, the percent alumni that are working or getting education or training in a related field, it's pretty phenomenal. On average, when you look at this, in FY15 students that graduated with us in the year 2015, 85% of them are working or studying in a related field to what they studied here at Stafford. The following year, it was 91.45. Last year, when we connected with our students from 17, it was a little bit lower, but again, the pandemic was happening and a lot of the students were displaced from school or employment. So it made it a little bit more challenging. This is something that we really work to follow up with students on because we want to know how they're doing. And we do surveys with our alumni each year to make sure that the training and the education that they received here at Stafford is meeting their needs for the business and for themselves as professionals. And the next slide. So some of the things that we've been working really hard on, and Ted mentioned this a little bit earlier, is some of our grant funding that supports our efforts. And we were very fortunate this year. We have a Carl D. Perkins grant, which is a federal grant that we receive annually that funds career and technical education throughout the country. And last year we were able to receive a large sum of that. It was around $374,000. And then we just received word that we'll be receiving an additional $92,000. And this really funds a lot of our program expansions and is allowing us to be able to meet the needs of our local businesses. When we write our Carl D. Perkins grant, we have to write it with a 5-year scope. And we have to complete what is called a comprehensive local needs assessment that is looking at not only the needs of the community, but the needs of the students, the needs of our alumni, and really bringing it together. The initiatives that we run under the Carl Perkins grant have to be industry driven. They have to provide equitable access for all students. So we want to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to learn in the field that they want to study. We have to make sure that we are increasing technical and academic skills, and we have to show data to prove that. And it's also a new area is increasing opportunities in grades 5 through 8 for partnerships around career exploration. And we were very excited this year to receive a GEAR grant. It was very COVID specific, and it was to help career and technical education, as you can imagine, is a very hands-on education, move to a virtual world. And that was a challenge, but our teachers did a lot of research and they were able to find some incredible opportunities for our students. It allowed our students to have individual work toolkits. So in the picture that you can see, those are the toolkits that were put together for our electrical and plumbing students. So should we have to go to remote, we would have toolkits ready for them to bring home to be able to continue the education at home. It also allowed us to operate safely here within the building this year by having students not having to share materials with others, so we could properly sanitize. And part of the GEAR grant, we received sanitation cabinets. So at the end of the day, tools can go into those sanitation cabinets to make sure that things are safe. But some of the really exciting things that we were able to do is we were able to get a virtual reality paint booth, which is really cool if we go remote, but also going forward, it's going to save us on paint costs. Paint for our paint booth in the auto body program is very expensive. And now our teachers will be able to go in and do training with the students in the virtual reality paint booth. And then going forward, when they feel that they're at a level that they're ready to go into the actual real paint booth, they'll feel more prepared. It's going to cause less waste. So we're very excited about things like that. And then finally, one of the things that drives the cost for technical education is something called our 6-semester average. And this is done so that we look at the 6 semesters previous when we're putting our budget together. And we do this by town, the town of residence of students. And so when we do this, what we do is we take a center-wide 6-semester average and we take our total expenses after we've subtracted out all of our revenues and divide it out. And that becomes our tuition rate. And so as you can see here, over the last 5 years, we have had a change in our center-wide 6-semester average from 234 to this year to 216.9. So that obviously is a factor when you're dividing your revenue and your expenses by that. That changes and can have a significant change. For Rutland City specific, the 6-semester average has been steadily increasing, which means more students are accessing career and technical education, which is what we love to see. So Rutland City residents are only billed for that 69.3 students. Even if we had 120 students here this year, the 6-semester average is what is billed to Rutland City and is put into the tax, into the budget for Rutland City Public Schools. The other note that I'll point out is that over the last few years, we have had some modest increases in our tuition, but we worked really hard to have a 0% increase from last year to this year. And that was made possible through some realignment of staff and also the grants that I spoke about and all we were able to do with those. So that's kind of a high-level overview of Stafford. And as Pam said, I will also be sticking around. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And at this point, we have completed the presentation material that we had planned and would be glad to open up for any questions or comments from our board members or senior leadership. Rob, are there any questions?
So Ted, thanks for asking. I was just going to advise we have some attendees in the webinar watching your great presentation, and Pam and Melissa. And so if you are out there and you have a question you're watching, you want to ask, at the bottom of your toolbar on the bottom of the screen, there should be a Q&A tab. If you click that, you can type your question in. If you have no questions, that's okay. But that's how we're doing questions today. Oop, one popped up. Let's see. So here is one question. Could you please tell us how much of the COVID grants have been utilized and how? So that goes back to your description earlier, Ted, about the CRF and also the ESSER.
Right. Well, Rob, you're an ESSER expert, but I'll speak to the COVID relief, and then perhaps Melissa may have some comment on the gear. But in terms of the COVID relief, we, as a district, we ended up filing for about $623,000 of assistance. We, in fact, just last Friday submitted the last of our reimbursement requests. Turned out that we're eligible for reimbursements for about $500,000 due to some changes in categories and definitions. We weren't able to capture the full amount, but of course we're very pleased that we have been able to capture about $500,000 for the benefit of the district. And it covered everything from PPE to signage to modifications we made in the classrooms for social distancing to sanitation supplies to some IT expenses, anything that you can imagine really that was related to changes we made to COVID. We're basically pretty eligible for. We also, for example, we were able to install some air purifiers, portable air purifiers in parts of buildings that didn't have as good a air circulation as others. So we were able to address those needs. And overall, I think we've done fairly well. Rob, do you want to talk about ESSER, and then maybe Melissa can talk about gear?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we received about somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2 million dollars in ESSER funds, and those are targeted federal funds that are supposed to help offset some of the costs we have as a result of the pandemic, and also help us meet the needs of our students. Our local independent schools are entitled to some of those funds too, and so about $50,000 to $70,000 are set aside for those people and those schools. And the rest of the funds were put to use here in Rutland City Public Schools, supporting salaries and benefits for teachers who are meeting the needs of kids in our pandemic model. So instead of having, maybe we had six fourth grade teachers, but we had to expand to create more space for kids to be farther apart so that we could meet the needs of our community in a face-to-face format. We were able to use those grant funds to pay the salary and benefits as an example for one of those teachers. In addition, we were able to use ESSER funds to pay for remote teachers. As you know, our entire community was given the choice if they wanted to come to school and be face-to-face so we could support the families that way, or they could select remote and we would support our community in that way, doing everything we could to meet our community's needs. And so the funds, about 1 million to 1.1 million, went to those salaries. One of the goals of that, and one of the benefits we hope will be that it'll reduce our expenses locally for the year, and another benefit to our taxpayers. That's how we put those funds to use. Melissa?
Yes, And with the GEAR grant, it was really equipment specific, and it was by the governor who kind of specified that. So one of the things that we really did, number one, is to make sure that our teachers and students had the technology that they needed, whether they were here in person in our hybrid schedule or remote. We have about 6% of our student population that is remote, 100%. So we first of all wanted to make sure that everyone had equal access to our education. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we really looked at technology that was going to allow students, whether we were here in our hybrid model or remote, to continue their learning. Again, by nature, we're very hands-on, so that makes it a challenge when we have to pivot and in a day switch to a remote model if the need be. So the goal was to make sure that we had enough student toolkits, if you will, that if we had to go remote, we would be able to send students home with hands-on learning opportunities that connected with their curriculum. So it might be a toolbox for electrical and plumbing. Our electrical and plumbing instructor, he created these great wiring boxes that students were able to bring home, and they had 18 different wiring lessons that they could do. We had our auto tech program who created a circuit board for how to diagnose with a multimeter where the short circuit was in an electrical system in a vehicle. And so students were able to work with those at home. And all of that was done through purchases with the GEAR grant.
Thank you very much.
I have another question, and then there's a comment that follows. The question is this: how can the district be responsible for providing food for all kids in the district over the summer and breaks? Is there help from the state or anything?
There's a significant program of funding through the federal government, but does anybody else want to talk about our summer universal lunch program?
Yeah. So I will start, and Bill or Ted, you can chime in. First of all, our food service, cafe services, is a real good support of our community. And when the pandemic started, they were ready to go mobile and deliver meals to everybody who needed them on the day it was requested. I don't believe any other district in the region was able to do that. And I will say that because of the federal support and the state support, they were able to provide us waivers so that we could provide meals to anyone under the age of 18 in the community that needed a meal. And people could even drive in from outside of the community and pick up a meal. And that support has continued pretty much throughout the school year. And still into vacations, we're able to provide some mobile support for meals. So anyone who's needed a meal, we've either been able to deliver to pickup sites or have sites here in Rutland City, like at Brock, one of our great community partners, where folks can go and pick up a meal if they need one or if they're hungry. There's also a big effort by our team right now to make sure that our neediest families are accessing or getting access to a special program, EPT. I can't get the acronym correct, but it is also it's a 4 squares setup so that families get support for food that they can buy at home for them. So that's my start. I think it's EBT cards, getting a little help from the attendees here. So that's what I have on meals. Anybody else want to add to that?
I think you covered it, and my understanding is we'll be able to continue doing this through the summer.
That would be great.
Right.
I have a comment. I think this is a comment. It says, I think the district has done an excellent job with pandemic education and having kids in school, realizing that the pandemic will set kids back, but you've done the best job possible. Thank you. That's the comment. And right now, I don't have any other questions.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, unless anybody else would like to make any comments, guess we can conclude. Joanne, would you like to say something?
I would just like to thank you, Ted, for all your hard work, and everyone, really, all of the administrators of the district for, especially during this very difficult time, for coming in with a a budget that cuts expenses overall, and you're doing all your due diligence. It's very much appreciated.
Well,
Thank
thanks. This is a wonderful team, and I know all of my colleagues here really appreciate the support we get from the community and from the school board. So thank you very much.
I have one more comment from the attendees. Just another thank you for a thorough and clear presentation.
We'll have this material out on the website under the finance section, and our contact information is there. So if anybody has further questions, please feel free to reach out. We're here to serve you.
Don't forget to vote. Vote, vote, vote. That's what we want.
Well, thank you everybody for your time this evening, and thanks to Pam and Melissa. We really appreciate your giving, the real impact of what the schools are doing. So thanks to everybody, and wish you a good evening. Go out and vote, like Rob said.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Everybody have a good night.